Welcome to the Nephron Fun Zone and Water Park. This is a family-friendly theme park with a family-friendly theme. Diuresis, of course. Could it use some renovations? Sure. Are these rides inspected for safety? That's just part of the thrill. Will we run into some major fluid and electrolyte disturbances along the way? Most definitely. Now, the whole point of diuretics is to get rid of volume. So as we discuss each diuretic action throughout this chapter, keep your eye on our recurring symbol for sodium, those salty sodium peanuts. You'll soon see that wherever sodium goes, water goes with it. As you can imagine, promoting volume loss can be useful when combating those edematous states caused by heart, kidney, or liver failure. But why stop at edema? An agent that blocks specific transport functions in the renal tubules can be used in non-edematous states as well, such as hypertension, nephrolithiasis, and electrolyte imbalances. Yep, it's gonna be a wild ride. I can't take the suspense any longer. Let's enter the park. First up, the Pro Kart track for some classic go-karting action. Looks like we're the first in line. Actually, it looks pretty vacant in general. Let's just wait here a bit and see what happens. Now, I've been to this park 1,000 times, so I know the layout like the anatomy of my urinary tract. But if we ever get separated, they have these convenient maps placed throughout the park to orient you. We'll be hitting up the rides at the proximal end of the nephron and working our way distally. Trust me, I've got it all planned out. First, take a look at that sign, and you'll soon realize that we're really standing in a larger-than-life recreation of the proximal convoluted tubule of the nephron. The proximal convoluted tubule is all about reabsorption. Seriously, pretty much everything is reabsorbed here. This includes electrolytes such as sodium, chloride, and potassium, and even organic solutes such as glucose and amino acids. By the end of the proximal convoluted tubule, the concentration of most solutes decrease. 66% of filtered sodium, 65% of potassium, and virtually all filtered glucose and amino acids. The other crucial thing happening here is bicarb reabsorption, around 85% of it in fact, crucial for maintaining acid-base status. In this section of the park, we're going to illustrate two diuretics that act in this area, acetazolamide and mannitol. And remember, keep your eye on those salty sodium peanuts. You'll soon see that wherever sodium goes, water goes with it. All right, I know I've been going on and on about how amazing this park is, but I just need to warn you that the Nephron Fun Zone and Water Park does not have the most diverse dining options. See this battery-powered vending machine over here? We're going to see these all over the park because it's our recurring symbol for that ubiquitous ion transporter, the sodium-potassium ATPase. Powered by 3 ATP batteries, it pumps 3 sodium out and 2 potassium in. This is depicted by a concerned health-conscious mom taking the salty sodium peanuts away from her son, exchanging them instead for a healthy potassium-filled banana. The key here is that this ion exchange is occurring at the basolateral membrane. In other words, the yellow portion of the tract represents the lumen of the renal tubule. The gray portion of the tract represents the intracellular compartment of the tubule epithelial cells. It's where all the absorbed stuff goes first. The area in the background behind the wall represents the interstitium. You know, inside your body. The wall then is the basolateral membrane where the sodium-potassium ATPase pumps all the sodium you're reabsorbing out into the interstitium. This maintains a low intracellular sodium concentration to make room for more reabsorption from the renal tubule. Let's head inside the nephron and illustrate the cause of all this sodium reabsorption. It's a salty sodium peanut vendor guy. Remember that the inside track is colored yellow to remind you of the tubular lumen. So our peanut salesman stands at the luminal membrane and distributes sodium out of the tubule and into the cell. He's also in charge of letting children onto the track, not without some required and likely under-sanitized protective equipment. The helmets are labeled with an H+ because they symbolize protons entering the lumen. This sodium proton exchanger on the luminal membrane is critical for setting up the entire process of bicarb reabsorption at the proximal convoluted tubule. Let me show you. Let's take one of the carts for a spin, shall we? Oh, dibs on the blue one. The cart is labeled bicarb because it represents bicarb in the tubular lumen that will be reabsorbed. In front, we've got a kid wearing that H+ helmet sitting in the driver's seat of another bicarb race car. This is because the H+ secreted into the lumen combines with bicarbonate to form carbonic acid, H2CO3. Also, look at that huge and likely unsafe battery getting dropped into the hood. That car battery represents intraluminal carbonic anhydrase. As we'll soon illustrate, this carbonic anhydrase car battery is going to power the conversion of all this newly formed carbonic acid into a form that can be reabsorbed. Time to put the pedal to the metal. See that stream of water and carbon dioxide gas spewing out the back? As the other competitors get left behind in a cloud of exhaust, that carbonic anhydrase car battery is catalyzing the rapid dehydration of carbonic acid into carbon dioxide and water. After we turn that corner, too fast, too furious, notice that we've exited the lumen. That's because the carbon dioxide produced by carbonic anhydrase enters the intracellular space by simple diffusion. The water gets sprayed inside as well. Remember all those solutes I mentioned earlier that are absorbed in the proximal tubule? Well, water is reabsorbed with them. This occurs passively through both a transcellular pathway by aquaporins and paracellularly. The water permeability at the proximal tubule is very high, so as those solutes are reabsorbed, water is carried with them, and the osmolality of the tubular fluid is maintained at a nearly constant level. Overall, the concentration gradient from the tubular lumen to the surrounding interstitium remains very small. Just remember that wherever solutes go, water goes too. Hence the water kicked up by our tires and splashing into the interstitium. All right, at the finish line, we end up inside the tubular epithelial cell. Once we turn off the ignition though, what happens to all that carbon dioxide and water we brought in? Well, once it's diffused inside, it turns back into carbonic acid. This is accomplished by intracellular carbonic anhydrase, the same enzyme as before. So as the theme park employee removes that carbonic anhydrase car battery, remember that intracellular carbonic anhydrase rehydrates us back to simple old carbonic acid. In other words, just a static bicarb cart with H+ helmet. All right, time to give your helmet to the next kid. Yep, those H+ helmets are recycled over and over again. You were wondering why that thing was so damp and dandruffy inside, weren't you? You see, once you reform carbonic acid inside the cell, it immediately dissociates back into a proton and bicarb. The proton is available for transport by the sodium proton exchanger all over again, while the bicarb is transported out of the cell and into the interstitium by a basolateral membrane transporter. Overall, this is what we've done. We had initially brought in sodium in exchange for a proton. Once in the tubular lumen, this proton grabs onto the nearest bicarb molecule, and the bicarb is brought inside the cell with a little help from carbonic anhydrase. In the end, both the sodium salted peanuts and the bicarb car have been brought into the cell, heading for the interstitium. All the while, the H+ helmet just cycles around, round and round. Now, if we interrupt this cycle with acetazolamide, for example, we can't reabsorb all this sodium bicarb. And if you reduce sodium reabsorption, you reduce water reabsorption, and you've got diuresis. What? You want to go again? Okay, if you say so. Oh, wait. Stop. Something's wrong. Look at the battery acid. That bicarb race car depends on a functioning carbonic anhydrase battery in order to make it out of the lumen and into the cell. This enzyme can be inhibited by acetazolamide and other carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. Acetazolamide, then, is kind of like this battery acid, rendering this carbonic anhydrase car battery non-functional. I think now would be a good time to call for help. Oh good, here comes one of the track workers now, with some alkaline powder to save the day. Get me out of this thing. By blocking carbonic anhydrase, bicarb can't be absorbed, builds up in the lumen, and the urine remains alkaline, hence the alkaline powder. Whoa, careful dude, you're dropping your salty soda and peanut snacks. He's reminding us that when carbonic anhydrase isn't doing its thing, H+ can no longer jump onto bicarb in the lumen, and so the sodium proton exchanger breaks down, leaving sodium in the renal tubule. Overall, acetazolamide blunts sodium bicarb reabsorption. Remember, wherever solutes go, water goes too. If you reduce sodium reabsorption, you reduce water reabsorption, and you've got diuresis. I want to emphasize the profoundly suppressed bicarb reabsorption that results from acetazolamide's inhibition of carbonic anhydrase. Bicarb can't be converted into an absorbable form and stays behind to get excreted. Depicted by the track worker here, pushing one of the inoperable bicarb cars down the lumen of the tubule, excreted, if you will. As you can imagine, dumping all those alkaline bicarb molecules will cause metabolic acidosis in the body. Specifically, this is a normal anion gap metabolic acidosis. It turns out that when you lose bicarbonate, your body compensates with an increase in chloride concentration. So if you measure all your ions in your serum, you won't see a gap. So instead of a high gap acidosis caused by those mud piles agents, you're left with a normal anion gap and a hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. To remind you of this normal gap, we've got an inspirational message written on the median of the racetrack telling car number 2 to close that gap. Wait, aren't we car number 2? Okay. So this attraction is having a few malfunctions. This attraction is pretty old. Carbonic anhydrase inhibitors were among the first diuretics discovered, and with the development of newer agents, carbonic anhydrase inhibitors are rarely used as diuretics, overshadowed by the newer rides further down the park. One of the problems is that bicarb depletion actually leads to enhanced sodium chloride reabsorption by the remainder of the nephron. So the diuretic efficacy of acetazolamide decreases significantly with use over several days. At present, the major clinical applications of acetazolamide involve carbonic anhydrase-dependent bicarb and fluid transport at other sites than the kidney. We'll highlight a few of them here among the spectating parents. Oh, look at the mom behind the wall. She's obviously new here. Everyone knows that the front row is a highly permeable water and electrolyte splash zone. As she reflexively protects her face, take a look at her drink spilling onto the track. The plastic domes on top of those cups should remind you of an eyeball, and the leaking fluid out of the eye depicts acetazolamide's ability to decrease aqueous humor production in the eye. The ciliary body of the eye normally secretes bicarb from the blood into the aqueous humor. Inhibiting its production will decrease intraocular pressure, useful in the management of glaucoma. Glaucoma is actually the most common clinical indication for carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, and there are even topical agents that have been developed for this purpose. Oh no, she's dropping her weird, awkwardly proportioned balloon too. Look closely and you'll see that the balloon is in the shape of a head inflated to high pressure and about to pop. This is to remind you that bicarb production is also important for the formation of CSF by the choroid plexus. Carbonic anhydrase inhibitors are believed to reduce the rate of CSF production. Thus, acetazolamide is usually first-line treatment for idiopathic intracranial hypertension, also known as pseudotumor cerebri. Although there's no clear evidence that such treatment improves long-term prognosis, there can be modest improvements in papilledema and CSF pressure. Other clinical indications of acetazolamide involve the metabolic effects of inhibiting bicarb reabsorption. Look at the pro-kart track worker up on his chair, waiting to signal the final lap to the racers. Well, it looks like he ascended his chair a little too quickly because he's showing the classic symptoms of acute mountain sickness. Mountain sickness occurs when mountain travelers rapidly ascend above 3,000 meters. The symptoms of weakness, dizziness, insomnia, headache, and nausea usually only persist for a few days. In more serious cases, these symptoms can be accompanied by life-threatening pulmonary or cerebral edema. By decreasing CSF production and by decreasing the pH of CSF in the brain, carbonic anhydrase inhibitors can increase ventilation, ameliorate hypoxia, and decrease the symptoms of mountain sickness. Lastly, I want you to look back at that track worker who saved my life back there. You know, the one who ran over with the alkaline powder. Well, we already discussed how carbonic anhydrase inhibitors cause bicarb to stay in the tubular lumen. So I just want to emphasize here that the buildup of bicarb in the tubule increases the pH of the urine, which can be used therapeutically. Urinary alkalinization can increase the solubility of uric acid and cysteine, preventing stone formation in gout and cystinuria. All right, let's briefly cover the side effects of acetazolamide, depicted by these two hooligans over here, still jockeying for first place. Whoa. Expert move. The old banana trick makes them spin out every time. The potassium-depleted banana peel should remind you that acetazolamide is a potassium-wasting diuretic. The reason is this. Remember all those salty peanuts getting spilled into the tubular lumen? Well, that sodium eventually makes it all the way to the collecting duct, where it at least partially is reabsorbed. As we'll see later, the sodium reabsorption in the collecting duct goes hand in hand with potassium secretion. However, this potassium wasting can be counteracted by using acetazolamide in combo with a potassium-sparing diuretic. We'll come across a few of those later. For now, just remember that potassium wasting is a problem with any diuretic that increases sodium delivery to the collecting duct. So expect that banana peel to pop up a few more times as we make our way through the park. Also, take a look at the two exhaust pipes on the back of the red cart. They look suspiciously like two tubes of acid. Tubes of acid are a recurring sketchy symbol for renal tubular acidosis. Recall that acetazolamide causes a hyperchloremic normal anion gap metabolic acidosis as a result of reduced bicarb stores. Specifically, this is a type 2 renal tubular acidosis, hence the two tubes of acid. Type 2 renal tubular acidosis can be seen with any defect in the proximal tubule bicarb reabsorption. This metabolic acidosis can actually be used therapeutically by administering acetazolamide during cases of refractory metabolic acidosis. Oh, good move! Why didn't I think of that? Where are they getting all these items? Remember how I mentioned that urinary alkalinization can inhibit certain types of stone formation? Unfortunately, calcium phosphate salts are relatively insoluble at a high pH. This means that carbonic anhydrase inhibitors can actually enhance stone formation from these salts. Okay, that's just uncalled for. Rotten eggs? Wait, are those dinosaur eggs? The stinky sulfurous eggs are our recurring sketchy symbol for sulfa drugs. And as you might have guessed, acetazolamide is a sulfa drug. So it may cause a hypersensitivity reaction in patients who have a sulfa drug allergy, though this has been shown to be very unlikely. Symptoms include fever, rash, bone marrow suppression, and interstitial nephritis. Check out our sulfonamide video in the antimicrobials unit for more info. All right, I can't compete with these guys. Let's move on to our next target. Mannitol! Shoot! Is that kid okay? Should I go and help him? Oh, his dad's there to put out the fire. Man, is he tall. Oh, that reminds me. Mannitol is the other diuretic that exerts its effect in the proximal convoluted tubule. Remember that the proximal tubule and the descending limb of the loop of Henle are freely permeable to water. Non-absorbable solutes, such as mannitol, sit in the lumen and retain water there, promoting water diuresis. This is called osmotic diuresis. It's kind of like this stream of water flowing down the drain. Mannitol just pulls water along with it to get excreted. Also notice that this tall man is standing next to one of those liberated high-pressure head balloons. Osmotic diuretics reduce brain volume by drawing free water out of the tissue and into the circulation where it's excreted by the kidneys. Mannitol can therefore be administered in urgent cases of elevated intracranial pressure. And look, there are those cups with the plastic domes again. Osmotic diuresis draws free water out of other compartments too, including the eye. Mannitol can therefore be used to decrease intraocular pressure before ophthalmologic procedures. Oh, poor kid. It looks like he's a little overwhelmed by all the dousing. Yep, that's in his lungs. Watch where you're pouring, slender man. He's not even on fire. Let the soggy lung spots on this sputtering child remind you that before the diuretic action of mannitol occurs, it can cause pulmonary edema. Mannitol is rapidly distributed in the extracellular compartment and extracts water from cells. This expansion of the extracellular volume can lead to pulmonary edema and hyponatremia. This expanded extracellular volume can also exacerbate heart failure, as shown by this floppy failing heart balloon that is also the target of the excessive beverage downpour. This leads to the fluid backup into the pulmonary circulation and pulmonary edema. The last side effect of mannitol I want to mention involves sodium balance, hence our salty sodium snacks balanced on the wall. Excessive use of mannitol without adequate water replacement can lead to severe dehydration, leading to hypernatremia. All right, before we get back in line, let's sum up this sketch. The procart tract embodies all the events of the proximal convoluted tubule, the site of action of acetazolamide. In the tubule, carbonic anhydrase is normally responsible for bringing in the H+ and bicarb by turning it into an absorbable form, carbon dioxide and water. Intracellularly, that carbonic anhydrase car battery works again to reform bicarb and H+. The bicarb car is taken away into the interstitium, while the H+ helmet is reused for cycling in more bicarb. Acetazolamide is like a non-functional acid-ridden car battery that prevents carbonic anhydrase from powering bicarb resorption, so bicarb stays in the lumen and is excreted. Because the H+ cycle is stopped as well, the sodium proton exchange is halted and sodium is also excreted. Wherever sodium goes, water goes too. So this is how acetazolamide can act as a diuretic to cause volume loss. But it's not really used as a diuretic. It's used more to treat mountain sickness and to reduce CSF production in idiopathic intracranial hypertension, as that awkward high-pressure head balloon would suggest. It also decreases aqueous humor production, helpful in the management of glaucoma. Also, because it leads to alkalinization of the urine, it can help you get rid of uric acid kidney stones, though it can precipitate calcium kidney stones. And remember that falling banana peel. This is a potassium-wasting diuretic. Mannitol is a tall man, is an osmotic diuretic that stays in the tubular lumen, pulling water out to be excreted. This can be useful in reducing CSF volume and aqueous humor volume. Acutely, it can increase intravascular volume to cause hyponatremia and exacerbate heart failure. After a while, it can pull out all your free water to cause instead hypernatremia. Well, with all these safety code violations and all, I think it's time to move on. I mean, it's only a matter of time before someone busts out the spiny shell. You like roller coasters? Oh, then you'll love the loop-de-loop of Henley.